Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Brewer's Minute. So this week, we're going to talk about something that we're probably long overdue to talk about, and that is kind of the step one basics of building budget decks. So we talk about budget all the time with Budget Magic, and it comes up on social media, but I don't think we've ever just had a video talking about kind of my underlying theory for building budget decks, and then I think it's actually really interesting and beneficial because I think a lot of people go about building budget decks in what I would consider the wrong way, or differently than I would go about building budget decks. So this is building on a budget building, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, a quick reminder before we break down budget building. If you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you could take a quick second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So what we're talking about today is basically there's two pathways to building budget decks. But first, before we get to the pathways, we got to talk a little bit about card prices because this kind of sets the stage for everything we're going to discuss as we go along today. So to understand the need for budget building, you got to understand the basics of card prices. And in modern and in standard, for the most part, the price of a card is based on the demand for the card. So cards that see a lot of play are more expensive than cards that don't see any play. So that means Scarab God, Chandras, Tarmogoyfs, Lilianas, especially true of mythics and rares, like that does matter as well, the rarity of the card. But basically, in modern and standard, cards that see a lot of play are more expensive than cards that don't see a lot of play. This is different than like Legacy and Reserve List. That throws the whole market out of whack. But for the most part, the market in standard and modern is pretty much based on demand. Like if people are playing a card a lot, the price goes up. It's more expensive because lots of people are buying it relative to the number of copies there are. So what that means in terms of budget building is you often just can't use staples. Like that's kind of the underlying problem we're trying to solve in building budget decks. You can't play the Scarab God. You can't play Tarmogoyf or Liliana or Blood Moon because those cards are just too expensive for the budget, and they're expensive because they are in demand and they are good and they are seeing play in a lot of different decks by a lot of different players. So when you go to build a budget deck, you basically have two paths, like underlying everything else. You got two choices. So one choice that I see lots of people ask about, and I think lots of people use, is the downgrade path. So you take a tier deck, a Scarab God deck, a Chandra deck, a Jund deck in modern, and you're like, okay, these cards are expensive. Tarmogoyf is expensive. What can I play instead of Tarmogoyf? Liliana is expensive. What can I play instead of Liliana? Dark Confidant's expensive. What can I play instead of Dark Confidant? And that is a way to build a budget deck. You trade in Scavenging Ooze for Tarmogoyf. You trade in, I don't even know, Liliana Vest for Liliana the Veil. You trade in Asylum Visitor for your Dark Confidants. The problem with that is you end up with a deck that's not very good most of the time. You end up with essentially a strictly worse version of a deck that's already out there. And at least for me, that's not very fun. Like, I don't like playing bad decks. That's not really appealing to me. Like, I enjoy playing unique decks and spicy decks, but if I feel like my deck is just strictly worse than another deck out there, that's not usually appealing for me. So my technique and thinking for building budget decks is to go the opposite direction and to try to basically go on the upgrade path, I'm going to call it. So rather than starting with a tier deck and being like, all right, how do I get rid of these expensive cards and replace them with cheap cards? I'm looking through tons of cards and trying to find cards that are undervalued and underplayed, which makes them cheap. Like if a card is not seeing play, it's going to be a lot cheaper, and trying to build the best possible deck around that undervalued card. So I think that the end result of that is you end up with much more fun and interesting decks. You're not just playing bad Jund where you cut all the expensive cards and played worse versions in those slots. Instead, you're playing the best version of a tribe that might not be as powerful as the tier decks, or a deck that might not be quite as good as the tier decks, but you're playing the best version of that. So I think it's a lot more fun to look for Night Tribal, or look for some wacky strategy that's undervalued because no one's thought about it, or that has some issues, and trying to build and play the best possible version of your Golden Guardian deck than it is to just play a strictly worse version of Scarab God Control. So the upside of that is because you can get the pieces really cheap and you get free wins too. Like, there's so many wins that we get on Budget Magic, on Against the Odds, that come from the fact that our opponent just doesn't know what's going on. Like, we're playing this strategy that no one else plays, so our opponent doesn't know what to play around. They don't know what really matters in the matchup or what combo might be randomly killing them. So it's beneficial from a gameplay perspective as well, and it's beneficial from a deck building perspective. You end up with much more unique and fun decks if you look for undervalued cards and build around them, rather than starting with a tier deck and trying to downgrade it to make it fit into your budget. So that is kind of my underlying theory of building budget decks. Rather than downgrading tier decks, scour the internet, scour your collection, scour whatever, Magic Online, to find unique and cheap effects that are powerful but are cheap because they're not seeing play right now, and try to build the best possible version of that deck, rather than building just a worse version of Scarab God Control, a worse version of Ramen on Bread, a worse version of Jund. And it's fine to go that path sometimes, but I think the best budget decks are the ones that are unique and the best at what they do. They're just doing something that no one else is doing, which makes them budget friendly because those cards aren't in demand. So anyway, something to think about as you're building on a budget, whether you want to be downgrading tier decks or trying to find those undervalued cards and building the best possible version of them. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.